After a great deal of thought and a lot of work on our relationship, we have made a decision to end our marriage. Over the last 27 years, we have raised 3 incredible children and built a foundation that works all over the world to enable all people to lead healthy, productive lives. We continue to share a belief in that mission and we will continue our work together at the foundation, but we no longer believe we can grow together as a couple in the next phase of our lives. We ask for space and privacy for our family as we begin to navigate this new life. Melinda Gates and Bill.
Arrive in New York, I have this female roommate from Microsoft, and she says, well, a bunch of us are here, 30 of us for this computer show. You're here by yourself. Why don't you, after you go do this business, come join us for this conference dinner tonight? It'll be just Microsoft people, and there'll be, 30 of us, 3 dozen. I said, great. I came across town, I came in late, there were 2 open seats, and I took the second to last open seat, and about 15 minutes later, Bill came in and sat in the last open seat. And so that's when we first met. I could sense that he was a bit interested, and but it took him quite a few months before he finally asked me out.
Yeah, and he said you played hard to get.
A little.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot going on back then.
I'm sure. So it's a Saturday because everybody worked on a Saturday at Microsoft. You're in the parking lot, and what does he say to you?
A couple months later, so it turned out his mom knew somebody who was on the board at Microsoft. It was on the board, at Duke. And so I guess he'd been asking for kind of some information about me. He knew I had worked at Duke. I had gone to Duke and then came to work at Microsoft. So anyway, we were working on a Saturday. I worked in a different building, but I guess we'd parked somewhere near each other. And I was coming out of the building, and so was he out of his building, and he struck up a conversation, and we started talking. And then this was on a Saturday, and he said, he finally kind of got around, and he said, well, would you go out with me, 2 weeks from Friday night? And I'm like, 2 weeks from Friday night? Who knows their calendar that far out? I said that wasn't really that spontaneous enough for me. Maybe call me closer to the date. That would be interesting, but call me a couple days ahead. And so I gave him my phone number, and he called me 2 hours later at home. He said, well, I have 2 things I have to go to tonight, a user group dinner and something else, but then could you go out with me for a drink? And I said, well, I guess that's a little more spontaneous, so I ended up going out with him.
And the rest, as they say, is history. Even before you got married, you all determined that you were going to contribute a great deal of your wealth to others. How did that conversation come about, and why did you all decide to do that?
Well, we both had been from families who really believed in volunteerism, believed in community service and giving back. And that was embedded deeply in both of our family structures, if you go back. And so we'd been dating for about 5.5 years, and during the time we were engaged, we took our first trip to Africa. Neither of us had ever been to the continent of Africa. We went, a little bit younger then. We went to see the animals and the savannah. We went on a safari. We took other couples with us. It was beautiful. We fell in love with everything we saw. But it's really not at all trite to say that we really fell in love with the people. And it started us on this series of questions of sort of saying to ourselves, what is going on here? Why is it we can be in a Land Rover or a Jeep and but there aren't many great roads, and how is it that we see all these people walking along the road to an open air market, men in flip-flops, women often with bare feet and a child in their belly and one on their back and something on their head. What has gone on here that things haven't started? And at the end of this trip, we went off to an island that we were planning to go just for a few days before we came home off the coast of Africa. And we were already engaged to be married, and we had a series of marriage questionnaire we had done to prepare for getting married. And we had a few things we wanted to go over where we wanted to make sure our values were the same, et cetera. And we started to talk on that trip that the vast majority of the resources from Microsoft would go back for society. And that was it was a given. And it was an easy discussion. It's what we both believed and we fundamentally wanted to do. And we just thought it would be later in our lives when we got to do it.
And I would go into meetings, like say with a prime minister or a president in a country. All the attention would be focused on Bill. And I think it is both because he's very smart. It's both because he was well known from what he did at Microsoft for good reason. And that wasn't always easy for me at first. And but what we learned to do was to be intentional about how we handled it. And so I would just let a little time go by in those meetings, let a little of the initial, curiosity or energy go by. And then eventually I would speak up. And Bill learned to make room for me to speak up. And then once I spoke up, people it was kind of funny. They went, whoa, she has a lot of credibility. She knows what she's talking about. And Bill actually thought, he was really humorous about it. He thought it was very funny. He goes, well, why wouldn't I think I married somebody smart? Of course I married somebody smart. We also had a lot of laughter and fun with it afterwards. When we saw a really extreme case of it, we would go home and laugh about it. I mean, because of the work that we do together day in and day out, it brings a heightened intimacy, quite frankly. I mean, to hear the story of somebody dying either together or separately, right? And it tugs at your heart. And then you think, who do I want to share that with? I want to share it with my spouse. This is a sculpture that Bill's parents gave us. And what we love about it so much is that it's these two birds who are looking forward together. And what it reminds us is these two birds, who presumably are mates, have a shared view out into the world. And to me, it reminds me that Bill and I have a shared vision.
So that we get to the peak and those numbers really start to come down. Within a month or so of hitting that peak, if we put in place the right prioritized testing, where the right people are tested and they get quick results, and we have contact tracing, then we will be able to start opening up. But it won't be a totally normal situation until we get a vaccine so that everybody's protected.
We've heard a lot from the president about the 30 days of social distancing. That takes us to May 1st, which is now just a couple of weeks from now. Do you see a possibility of the country reopening in just a couple of weeks, Bill?
Well, the numbers should drive us here. And a group we fund called International Health and Metrics and Evaluation is showing that the numbers are starting to come down. And maybe in late May, we'll have 1 per 100,000 active cases, because you don't want to shut down again. And, the governors have been good leaders. So that dialogue between the experts and the leaders, I think that's happening now. And our foundation is part of that dialogue.
And even when we talked to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation this week, one of the discussions we were having with them is we all need to learn, as places in Spain start to open slowly, different regions, and even in the United States, where the epidemic came first and where we can open slowly and watch and see what happens, particularly because we need to have more of the testing and the contact tracing. And you're seeing some places in the United States where the testing still isn't at all what it needs to be.